Before the war, the most profound silence I knew was in the reading room of the University of Edinburgh Library. It was a heavy, academic quiet, thick with the rustle of turning pages and the scent of old paper and leather. It was a silence of potential, of minds at work building upon the foundations of history. I was studying philosophy, you see. I believed with the earnest naivety of a 22-year-old that reason and discourse were the ultimate arbiters of human conflict. I believed in civilization. Nazism, to me, was a failure of logic, a grotesque philosophical fallacy that had to be refuted. So I enlisted, not with a roar, but with a quiet, calculated sense of duty. They tested my eyes, my patience, my ability to remain utterly still, and they gave me a rifle instead of a book. They sent me to Italy to refute the fallacy with a .303 caliber round. The silence I fear now is of a different sort entirely. It is the absolute dead stillness that rushes in to fill the vacuum left by the crack of my Lee Enfield number 4. It's the silence that descends upon a single man, 100, maybe 600 yards away. A man who, a second before, was alive, breathing, thinking, perhaps cursing the Italian cold, and is now just a still life. A subject for the crows, that is the silence of consequence, the silence of a life I have personally, precisely, and irrevocably ended. It is the silence that followed my duel on the banks of the Sangro River, November 1943. The Italian campaign had ceased to be the romantic liberation we'd been sold. It was a miserable, grinding slog up a country that seemed determined to break us. The 78th Battle Axe Division was trying to force a crossing over the Sangro. The river itself was a swollen, brown torrent, and the opposite bank was a fortress. The Germans, masters of defense, had burrowed into every ridge, every ruined farmhouse, every olive grove, and among them they had a ghost. That's what the lads from the 5th Battalion called him, the ghost of the Sangro. He was a sniper, and he was good, frighteningly good. He didn't waste ammunition on riflemen slogging through the mud. He was an artist of morale. He'd take out the man carrying the Bren gun, silencing our primary support. He'd shoot the medic, a red cross on his helmet be damned. He'd wait for an officer to unroll a map, a moment of command, and put a round right through his binoculars. He was surgical, he was creating chaos, making us feel watched and helpless. My company commander, a man whose face was a permanent mask of exhaustion, called me to his dugout. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and stale cigarette smoke. "Finch," he said, his voice a low gravel, "this German, he's gutting us. I need you to find him. I need you to put him down." It wasn't a question. It was the presentation of a problem, and I was the tool for its solution. That's how I had to think of it. Back in Edinburgh, I could spend a week breaking down a single paradox from Kant. Here, the problem was a man, and the solution was a bullet. The intellectual exercise remained, but the stakes were messier. My partner was a corporal named Davies, a tough-as-nails Geordie whose pre-war life involved hewing coal, not parsing Plato. He said little, but he saw everything. Together, we crawled out before dawn into a landscape that felt like a circle of hell Dante had forgotten to write about. It was a churned mess of mud, splintered olive trees, and the skeletal remains of stone farmhouses. The cold was a physical entity, a damp, clinging thing that burrowed into your bones. Every shell crater was half filled with icy brown water. The sky was the color of slate. For the first day, we did nothing but watch. This was the patient part of my craft, the part that came naturally to the student who could spend 8 hours in a library without moving. I found us a position in the upper floor of a collapsed barn, a shell hole in the wall giving us a commanding view of the German lines across the river valley. The air smelled of wet decay and the faint, acrid tang of cordite. Davies had the binoculars and I had my scope. We watched, we listened, we became part of the ruin, and I began to build a map in my head. That was my gift, my particular skill. While others saw a chaotic mess of hills and gullies, I saw lines of sight, fields of fire, dead ground. I saw the subtle trails in the mud that betrayed a supply route. I noted the single tree that still had a few leaves, a perfect, if obvious, observation post. I sketched it all into a small, grimy notebook, my fingers stiff with cold. I was creating a mental architecture of the battlefield, and somewhere within it lived my target. We saw his work before we saw him. A runner, trying to dash between two positions, suddenly crumpled, folding in on himself like a discarded puppet. No sound of the shot reached us, lost in the wind in the distance. Just the silent, brutal effect. Davies swore under his breath. I just made a note. The shot came from the east, from a ridge dominated by a half-destroyed chapel. His position was high, well concealed. He was a professional. That night we shivered in our hole, taking turns on watch. We ate stale biscuits that tasted of sawdust and drank lukewarm, bitter tea from my flask. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the sudden, terrifying bloom of an illuminating flare that bleached the landscape white and stark, freezing every shadow in place. In those moments I felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. The fear was a constant, low hum beneath my analytical thoughts. It wasn't the fear of dying, not exactly. It was the fear of a mistake, a single miscalculation. For a sniper, a mistake isn't a bad grade, it's a sudden, violent end. The second day began. The waiting stretched into a physical ache in my back and legs. Patience is an active thing. It's a battle against your own body's desire to move, to stretch, to do anything but remain a frozen statue. I felt a kinship with this German. He was out there, somewhere, doing the same thing. He was my opposite number, my dark reflection across the valley. He was probably cold, probably hungry. Did he study something before the war? Did he read Goethe while I read Shakespeare? Or was he a forester, a man who understood the land in a way I never could? The duel had become intensely personal, a silent conversation between two minds. Late in the afternoon, Davies nudged me, a sharp jab to the ribs. There, he whispered, his breath fogging in the air. Chapel, third window from the left. I swung my scope over. My heart began a slow, heavy drum against my ribs, and I saw it, not him, something better, a subtle disturbance. A piece of canvas, painted to look like the surrounding stone, had shifted just a fraction. It was a mistake, a tiny, almost imperceptible mistake born of 30 hours of cold and exhaustion. He was in there. He was in the bell tower of the ruined chapel. Now the chess game truly began. He knew we were here. Our runner's death would have told him someone was watching this sector. He was waiting for me to make my move, to reveal my position. I could take a shot at the canvas, but it was likely a ruse. A shot would give away my hide, and his comrades in the trenches below would plaster this barn with machine gun fire. No, the first move had to be his. We prepared a decoy. It was an old trick, but sometimes the old ones work best. We took a spare helmet, stuck it on the end of a rifle, and slowly, painstakingly, pushed it up over a broken wall a few feet to our left. It was a crude imitation of a man cautiously peering over cover. We waited, 1 minute, 2, 5. The tension was a physical wire pulling taut in my chest. My hands, gripping the cold stock of my rifle, were sweating despite the freezing air. I kept my scope trained on the chapel window. Then it happened. A tiny flash of light from the darkness of the window, a glint. He was using a periscope, trying to draw our fire without exposing himself. He was cautious. He was smart. But he had confirmed his location. My mental map clicked into place. I knew his field of fire, his probable line of retreat, but he had also seen our decoy. He knew we were in this barn. The advantage was gone. Now it was a battle of nerves. Who would break first? Who would get careless? The hours crawled by. The light began to fail, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gray. He would have to move soon. He couldn't stay in that tower forever. We couldn't stay here forever. And then I saw it. A movement at the base of the chapel. Not from the window, but from a side door, almost completely obscured by rubble. A figure emerged, hunched low, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of experience. It was him. He was leaving his post, probably to a more secure position for the night. He was exposed for maybe 5 seconds as he crossed a small, open patch of ground. But he wasn't alone. Another German soldier was with him, and this second man was limping badly, his arm thrown over the sniper's shoulder for support. The ghost was helping a wounded comrade. In the gray, fading light, it was an act of profound humanity, a moment of care in a world of absolute brutality. My training screamed at me. My intellect screamed at me. He was the target. This was the moment I had waited 36 hours for, a clear shot, unobstructed, 600 yards, an easy calculation for wind and drop. The problem was presenting its solution. It was perfect, and it was morally hideous. To shoot a man in the back is one thing. To shoot a man while he is helping a wounded friend, it felt like a violation of some unspoken, perhaps non-existent, rule. In that split second, all my university lectures on ethics, on the nature of a just act, swirled in my head. Was this protecting civilization, or was I just becoming a more efficient barbarian? I saw him not as the ghost, not as the enemy, but as a man burdened by the same duty to his friend as I had to my mission. Davies hissed beside me. "Finch, take the bloody shot." His voice broke the spell. He was right. This wasn't a philosophical debate. That German sniper had killed a dozen of our men. He would kill a dozen more tomorrow. His single act of compassion did not erase the ledger. My duty was not to my own conscience, but to the men in my battalion. I was the tool. This was my function. I took a breath, letting it out slow and steady, the way they taught me. The world narrowed to the small circle of my scope. I placed the post of the reticle on the center of his back. I didn't think about the wounded man he was helping. I didn't think about Edinburgh. I thought about the trajectory of a 174-grain bullet over 600 yards. I squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against my shoulder, a familiar, violent shove. The crack echoed across the valley, a sound both intimate and immense, and through the scope I watched my solution unfold. The sniper arched backward, a marionette whose strings had been abruptly cut. He collapsed, pulling the wounded man down with him. For a moment they were a tangled heap on the frozen mud. Then the wounded man stirred, trying to crawl away. But the ghost of the ghost was perfectly, utterly still, and then it came, the silence. It rushed in, vast and empty and absolute. The wind died down, the distant rumble of artillery ceased. It felt as if the entire world had gone quiet to observe this one small, final stillness. There was no elation, no sense of victory, just a profound, hollow ache in the center of my chest. I had won the chess match. I had solved the problem, and in doing so, I felt like I had lost a part of myself I could never get back. I looked at the still figure through my scope for a long time, a small, dark shape in the twilight. No longer a ghost, just a body, just another piece of the ruined landscape. He was an expert, a professional, a man capable of compassion, and I had shot him in the back. That is the truth of it. That is the memory that never fades. These memories are heavy, but they must be shared. Subscribe to ensure these stories are never forgotten.